You've said it's fine when your heart was far from okay, smiled to avoid tension even as something inside you quietly recoiled, and agreed to things that didn't sit right just to keep everything smooth on the surface. Each time you did, it may have seemed like the mature choice, the noble thing to do, but deep down you knew you weren't at peace. You were disappearing. We've been conditioned to believe that avoiding conflict is a sign of strength, that being easygoing is the key to connection, and that saying nothing is better than risking discomfort. But no one ever tells you what that silence really costs. Slowly, you stop speaking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you doubt whether your truth deserves space. You hesitate before answering, calculate your tone, censor your thoughts, and in doing so, you don't just keep the peace, you lose your sense of self. This isn't about being confrontational for the sake of it. It's about reclaiming the right to be fully present in your own life. It's about choosing honesty, even when it makes the room uncomfortable. It's about saying no without apology and standing in your truth without shrinking for someone else's comfort. Real freedom isn't found in always being agreeable. It's found in living a life that doesn't betray you. If you've ever felt the ache of staying silent just to be accepted, this is your call to stop. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, when was the last time your silence cost you a piece of who you are? 1. Silence is not peace. It's often fear in disguise. Have you ever stayed quiet in a conversation, not because you agreed, but because you were afraid of what might happen if you spoke your truth? Maybe you nodded even when something inside you screamed, "This isn't right." Maybe you smiled to keep things pleasant, even though you were shrinking with every second that passed. People call it being mature or keeping the peace. But if you look closer, you'll realize that what feels like peace on the outside can be a slow erosion of the self on the inside. Because silence, when rooted in fear, is not maturity. It's emotional self-erasure wrapped in politeness. Many people live their entire lives confusing avoidance for wisdom. They believe that staying out of conflict means they've grown. But growth is not measured by how well you bury your discomfort. It's measured by how honestly you show up in the room. When you keep your voice tucked beneath the surface just to keep the water still, you're not protecting peace. You're betraying your presence. And that kind of betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle, quiet, and often praised by others, until one day you realize you haven't said something honest in weeks. You hesitate before giving opinions, you second-guess your needs, and you let others take space while you disappear into the background. What started as a small compromise becomes a personality. And the worst part? Most people won't even notice you've gone missing, because the version of you they like is the one that never made a ripple. This kind of silence is not strength. It is the echo of emotional numbness, born from years of trying to please others by muting your own truth. It's the "I'm fine" that hides anxiety. It's the "sure, whatever works for you" that masks frustration. It's the subtle withdrawal from real connection, replaced with robotic interactions where you perform calm while carrying chaos. Over time, this silence breeds resentment, not always loud, but always growing. It creeps in through sarcasm, tired smiles, and passive indifference. And by the time it surfaces, it's often too late. The relationship is hollow, your confidence is cracked, and you've forgotten how to speak without flinching. Here's what many never say out loud. Avoiding conflict doesn't keep relationships strong. It keeps them dishonest. Because true connection doesn't come from harmony. It comes from honesty. It comes from being seen fully, even when your truth disrupts someone's comfort. If you always have to filter your voice to be accepted, that's not a relationship. That's performance. And no performance can replace presence. Your presence, in its raw, unedited, emotionally honest form, is the foundation of freedom. And freedom is the opposite of fear. There's a quiet war happening inside many people, between the part of them that wants to stay safe and the part that wants to be seen. The safe part says just agree, don't rock the boat. The seen part says speak, even if your voice trembles. And this war, when unresolved, leads to deep emotional fatigue. You begin to live for approval rather than alignment. You walk on eggshells instead of walking in truth. And eventually, even your body begins to carry the weight. Tension in your jaw, a heaviness in your chest, an ache you can't name but feel every time you silence yourself again. To break this cycle, you have to understand this. Your silence is not neutral. It shapes you. Every time you choose it to avoid discomfort, you teach your nervous system that your truth is dangerous. You wire your mind to associate honesty with risk. And so your natural self, your curious, bold, expressive, and feeling self starts to go quiet. You become agreeable but not connected, polite but not alive, safe but not free. This is why breaking the silence matters. Not to argue, not to dominate, not to prove anything, but to reclaim the parts of yourself that have gone missing beneath the fear. Saying what you mean, even gently, is a form of emotional honesty. Setting boundaries, even kindly, is a form of authentic self-liberation. And walking into discomfort with clarity is how you stop people-pleasing and start soul-keeping. The truth is, most people won't give you space to be real. You have to take it. And yes, you might lose the approval of those who preferred your silence. But what you'll gain is something far more powerful: self-trust. And once you rebuild that trust with yourself, once you know that you'll no longer abandon your voice for anyone, you become unshakable. So the next time you feel that familiar pull, the urge to nod instead of speak, to smile instead of say, "This bothers me," to keep things light when your soul feels heavy, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting peace or just avoiding discomfort? And then breathe deep and say the thing you've been swallowing. Not to win, not to hurt, but simply to be whole. Because silence may feel safe, but your truth is sacred, and you were never meant to disappear in exchange for harmony. 2. Self-abandonment is not kindness. I once knew a woman who was deeply admired by everyone around her. She was the kind of person who never said no, who always smiled even when plans changed last minute, and who constantly placed the needs of others above her own. At dinners, she would let everyone else choose the restaurant. At work, she would quietly pick up tasks no one wanted. And whenever someone praised her patience or her warm presence, she'd simply nod with a polite smile. But I remember one evening at a small gathering when someone casually asked what dish she wanted to order. She smiled and said, "Whatever makes everyone happy is fine with me." No one thought twice, but I noticed her eyes. There was a flicker of something, fatigue, maybe, or that quiet ache of someone who's grown used to never being chosen, not even by herself. It's easy to mistake this kind of behavior for kindness. Society often rewards those who are selfless, agreeable, and low maintenance. We call them thoughtful, generous, and easy to be around. But beneath that praise, there's often a person who has learned to survive by staying small. A person who believes that expressing needs might burden others, that saying no is selfish, and that discomfort should always fall on their shoulders, never on anyone else's. Over time, this pattern doesn't just erode confidence, it erodes identity. When you constantly silence your wants for the sake of others, you stop knowing what those wants even are. The danger of self-abandonment is that it looks like virtue. It wears the mask of love, compassion, and humility, when in reality, it's often a deep-seated fear of rejection. Many people who live this way aren't doing it because they're naturally passive. They're doing it because somewhere along the way, they were taught that their presence was only safe if it didn't take up space. They were conditioned to earn love, not by being authentic, but by being agreeable. And so they learned to swallow their needs, soften their truth, and fade behind the comfort of others. This is especially common in long-term roles, partners, parents, friends, employees, where expectations settle in like habits. You become the reliable one, the one who never causes waves, the one everyone turns to because you never complain. But what they call stability may in truth be your silent exhaustion. And what they admire as grace may in truth be your slow emotional depletion. The reality is, when kindness comes at the cost of your inner truth, it's not kindness, it's emotional self-neglect. And that neglect has consequences. You begin to feel unseen, not because others ignore you, but because you've trained them not to look. You begin to feel unimportant, not because your voice has no value, but because you've stopped using it. You begin to resent those around you, not because they are cruel, but because you've never given them the chance to meet the real you. And perhaps worst of all, you begin to lose trust in yourself. Every time you override your intuition, every time you say yes when your body says no, every time you prioritize harmony over honesty, you chip away at the foundation of your self-worth. Reclaiming that worth requires a difficult but necessary shift. It requires you to believe that your needs are not inconveniences, that your preferences are not too much, that saying what you want is not offensive, it's truthful. And more than anything, it requires you to let go of the fear that being fully seen will lead to disconnection. Because the truth is, a real connection cannot exist without honesty. You cannot be truly loved if you are never truly known, and you cannot be truly known if you keep hiding behind "I'm okay" when you're not. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive or self-centered. It means becoming whole. It means recognizing that emotional honesty is not the opposite of kindness, it's the root of it. It means understanding that people-pleasing may bring temporary harmony, but it robs you of long-term peace. And it means remembering that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but doors to invite in only what supports your well-being. When you stop abandoning yourself for the sake of others, something profound begins to happen. Your voice returns, your preferences become clearer, your relationships deepen, not because you're more agreeable, but because you're more real. And most importantly, you begin to feel at home within yourself, no longer waiting for external approval to validate your inner truth. So the next time you're tempted to say it's fine, just to keep the room light, pause. Ask yourself if this is an act of care or another quiet moment of self-erasure. And if it is, choose differently. Because kindness is only true when it includes you. And you are not here to disappear in the name of being liked. You are here to live honestly, speak clearly, and love yourself enough to take up space. 3. Repressed emotions don't disappear. They deform you. Emotions are like springs. You can press them down once, maybe twice, and they'll bounce back. But if you keep applying pressure again and again without release, something changes. That tension builds quietly, invisibly, and without warning. It snaps, often in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and in a way that catches everyone, including yourself, off guard. Most people don't explode over what's big. They break over the smallest thing, a forgotten text, a late reply, a misplaced word. Not because those things matter so much, but because they've been holding back too much for too long. And by the time they finally react, the emotion has mutated into something unrecognizable. That's what happens when we repress. We don't eliminate emotions, we bury them. And buried emotions don't die. They distort. They sink into the unconscious, reshaping how we think, how we behave, and how we connect. You start to smile through frustration, laugh when you want to scream, or stay quiet when your soul wants to speak. Over time, your body becomes the vault where unspoken pain is stored, and that pain leaks out as anxiety, exhaustion, short tempers, or emotional numbness. The world sees your surface, functional, composed, and reliable. But deep down, you're fraying, because every suppressed emotion is still alive, pulling strings in silence. The tragedy is that we're often praised for this. People will tell you how strong you are, how composed, how nothing ever gets to you. They won't realize that what they're admiring is the mask, crafted not from peace, but from the fear of being too much, from the belief that expressing your real feelings will cost you love, stability, or acceptance. So you keep bottling it up. You hold your breath emotionally, day after day, until you no longer remember what breathing freely even feels like. This is how self-abandonment becomes your second skin, so familiar you don't question it, even as it exhausts you. Eventually, the pressure finds its exit, sometimes through unexpected tears, sometimes through an outburst you don't understand, sometimes through chronic stress that you can't explain. That's not weakness. It's a natural response to unnatural suppression. Because when you keep editing yourself for too long, your truth doesn't vanish. It finds other ways to speak. Through body tension, through insomnia, through burnout, and often through resentment that simmers beneath your relationships, turning your interactions cold, robotic, and performative. You become emotionally detached, not because you don't feel, but because you've trained yourself not to show. This distortion spills into how you relate to others. You stop asking for what you need. You assume your desires are inconvenient. You try to anticipate what others want and shape yourself accordingly. Slowly, you live less from your center and more from reaction. You become a version of yourself that's efficient but not expressive, helpful but not heard, present but not fully alive. And while the world may appreciate your stability, you know what it's costing you. Your truth, your presence, your peace. To reclaim what's lost, you don't need to scream. You need to stop swallowing. You need to make space again, for anger that needs to be honored, for sadness that needs to be felt, for discomfort that needs to be named. Emotional honesty doesn't mean being dramatic. It means being whole. It means recognizing that your feelings are messengers, not threats. That they show up for a reason, that they carry insight, not danger, and that ignoring them doesn't protect you, it fragments you. It takes courage to let yourself feel again, especially after years of emotional suppression. But the more you allow those hidden parts to come into the light, the more you return to clarity. And clarity is power. Because once you understand what you're feeling, you can choose how to respond, rather than letting the pressure decide for you. You stop reacting from a place of buried tension and start speaking from a place of grounded truth. There is no shame in feeling deeply. What weakens you is not your emotion. It's the weight of holding it in alone. The moment you let go of the need to look okay all the time is the moment your healing begins. Because you don't need to be agreeable to be respected. You don't need to be silent to be safe. You don't need to hide your truth to be loved. What you need is permission from yourself to feel fully, to speak freely, and to live without folding your soul just to fit someone else's comfort. That's not rebellion, that's restoration, and it begins by releasing what you've held in for too long. 4. Every time you avoid conflict, you give away a piece of yourself. You've probably had that moment. You walk away from a conversation, step into your car, shut the door, and as the engine hums to life, so does your inner voice. I should have said something. I shouldn't have nodded. That wasn't okay. But you didn't speak. Not because you lacked the words, but because you handed over your truth in exchange for a brief illusion of peace. That lingering tightness in your chest, the breath you didn't even realize you were holding. It's not regret for what you said, but for everything you didn't. And the ache isn't because you were weak, but because you watched yourself disappear. One silent compromise at a time. This is the quiet cost of conflict avoidance. It's subtle, and on the surface it looks like patience, like being easygoing, like knowing when to let things go. But deep down, it's a slow, silent erosion of your identity. The more you say it's fine when it's not, the more your nervous system learns to associate truth with danger. And so you train yourself, day by day, moment by moment, to shrink, to adjust, to yield, not out of grace, but out of fear. What you call keeping the peace is often just the mask of emotional repression. The truth is, no one else sees the war happening beneath your calm exterior. No one else hears the inner dialogue, the negotiation between your longing to speak and your fear of how it will land. And so they praise your composure, admire your agreeableness, and never ask what it's costing you. They see harmony, you feel hollow. They see someone easy to be around, you feel like a stranger to yourself. Every time you stay silent to avoid rocking the boat, you drift further from the shore of who you are. And eventually, you look up and realize you've become fluent in the language of approval, but completely illiterate in the language of your own needs. What makes this worse is that people-pleasing is often mistaken for kindness. But real kindness doesn't ask you to betray yourself. Real kindness is grounded in authenticity. It doesn't mean avoiding all discomfort. It means speaking the truth with respect. Yet when you've spent years believing that your role is to keep everyone else comfortable, telling the truth begins to feel like an act of aggression. You start to think that saying no is being selfish, that expressing your feelings is being dramatic, and that drawing a boundary is pushing people away. So you choose silence. You choose softness. And with every choice, you give away another part of yourself, not to someone who asked for it, but to the fear that said you must. This emotional abandonment doesn't just live in the mind, it burrows into your body. You wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep. You feel anxiety without knowing why. You carry tension in your shoulders, in your jaw, in your stomach. These aren't random symptoms, they're signals. They're the cost of denying your emotional honesty. And no amount of external calm can erase the internal chaos that grows when your truth has no place to live. But there is another way, one that doesn't require you to choose between being honest and being loved. One that starts when you realize that discomfort is not the enemy. Disconnection is. You were not born to be agreeable, you were born to be whole. You were not meant to walk on eggshells in your own life. And if telling the truth makes someone uncomfortable, it may be the discomfort that was always waiting to be acknowledged. Speaking up doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be real. It's in the quiet courage of saying, actually, that doesn't sit right with me. It's in the brave honesty of admitting when something hurts. It's in the grounded strength of knowing that you don't have to explain your boundary to make it valid. Each time you do this, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was left behind in old patterns of silence. It won't always feel natural at first. In fact, it may feel like rebellion. But it's not. It's restoration. It's the moment you stop letting others define your peace. It's the moment you stop letting approval cost you your integrity. And it's the moment you finally start to recognize your reflection, not the version you created to survive, but the version that's been waiting to breathe. So the next time you feel that familiar pause, the one where your instinct says speak, but your habit says stay quiet, choose yourself. Not with anger, not with blame, but with clarity. Speak the words your silence has been holding hostage, because every time you avoid conflict, you don't just delay a hard moment, you lose a part of yourself. And freedom doesn't come from staying agreeable. It comes from staying true. 5. The mask of harmony leads to emotional numbness. Have you ever worn a face mask all day? At first it feels like protection, like a shield against everything out there. But after a while it starts to feel suffocating. You can breathe, but not fully. You can speak, but not clearly. And slowly, you begin to forget what it feels like to breathe fresh air. That's what emotional masking feels like too. The mask of harmony, the performance of being fine. You nod when you disagree, smile when you're drained, and say I'm good, even though you're running on empty. At first, it feels like a smart strategy to stay safe, to keep relationships smooth and workplaces civil. But over time, you realize it's costing you something vital. The price of wearing this emotional mask every day is your connection to your own feelings. You don't just suppress anger or sadness, you begin to suppress joy, excitement, even desire. Everything flattens. What once were vibrant colors of human experience become grayscale. This isn't peace, this is numbness. And numbness is not a lack of emotion, it's a survival state. It means your body and mind have learned that feeling is dangerous, so they shut it all down, not selectively but entirely. You're not calm, you're muted. And that silence inside doesn't bring serenity, it brings a hollow ache you can't explain. This emotional shutdown doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, one "it's okay" at a time. One swallowed opinion, one avoided conversation, one more instance where you put everyone else's comfort above your own. You start small, not speaking up when something feels off, not expressing your disappointment, not setting that boundary, but it grows. Eventually, you stop even recognizing when you feel off, because the mask is on so tightly that it becomes part of your skin. You're agreeable, you're composed, you're liked, and yet, you're vanishing. The worst part is how rewarded this behavior often is. People praise you for being so easy to be around. They trust you to smooth out conflict, to keep the room light, to absorb discomfort without ever reflecting it back. But what they see as kindness is sometimes just silence wrapped in fatigue. What they admire as self-control is often just emotional suppression masquerading as stability. And because you don't scream, because you don't push back, they never question if you're okay. That's the cruelty of invisibility. You become essential to everyone's comfort but your own. And then comes the fatigue. Not just tiredness, but soul-level exhaustion. You sleep, but you don't rest. You laugh, but it doesn't feel full. You show up, but it feels like autopilot. Emotional numbness steals your vitality and replaces it with robotic functionality. You do what's expected, but it feels like you're watching your life from the outside. You're present, but not really alive. And the truth is, that kind of detachment doesn't protect your relationships. It weakens them. Because connection without authenticity is an illusion. And when you're not fully in the relationship, the bond isn't real. It's role play. Reclaiming your emotional life doesn't require drama. It requires honesty. It means slowly loosening the grip on that mask. It means checking in with yourself before you check in with others. It means recognizing that your role is not to carry everyone else's emotional weight while ignoring your own. And it means understanding that your silence, though comfortable for others, is slowly corroding your sense of self. You don't need to swing to the other extreme. You don't need to explode or reject everyone or make declarations. You just need to come back into your body. You need to acknowledge your inner voice, even if you don't act on it yet. You need to feel again, bit by bit, not because feelings are always right, but because they're always real. And reality is the only place where healing begins. This isn't easy, especially if you've spent years earning love by being the agreeable one, the dependable one, the one who never makes things harder. But being easy for others should not mean being hard on yourself. You can be kind and still be honest. You can be calm and still be firm. You can be loving and still have boundaries. That's not a contradiction, that's emotional truth. So the next time someone asks you how you're doing, pause. Not for them, but for you. Check if your "I'm good" is real, or just a line in the script you've learned to perform. Because the mask of harmony may keep things quiet, but it also keeps you from feeling fully alive. And you weren't born to live behind a mask. You were born to be whole, to be known, and to feel deeply, honestly, and without apology. 6. Conflict is not chaos, it's clarity. We often treat conflict as if it were a storm to be avoided at all costs, loud, destructive, and dangerous. It's framed as failure, a sign that something has gone wrong. But look closer. Have you ever had a difficult conversation with someone? One where voices were raised, truths were uncomfortable, and emotions raw, and yet afterward, the relationship felt clearer, more honest, even stronger? That's because conflict, when approached with presence and intention, is not chaos. It is clarity breaking through illusion. And it doesn't destroy connection, it defines it. What destroys relationships isn't disagreement. It's pretense. It's months or even years of pretending everything is okay when it's not, of avoiding truth to keep things smooth, of silently collecting resentment under the mask of peace. That quiet buildup creates emotional clutter, turning simple misunderstandings into deep wounds. Conflict, when avoided for too long, doesn't disappear, it simmers. And when it finally surfaces, it does so not as a conversation, but as an explosion. The irony is, by trying to avoid chaos, we create a much bigger one. True clarity lives on the other side of tension. But to get there, you must pass through the discomfort of honesty. You must be willing to sit in conversations that are not scripted, to hear things that challenge your pride, and to speak truths that make your voice shake. This isn't about arguing or being aggressive. It's about choosing transparency over image, presence over performance. Because the longer you fake harmony, the more fragmented your connection becomes, and people can sense that. You may keep the peace, but it will be hollow. You may avoid confrontation, but you'll also avoid closeness. The problem is that most of us were never taught how to engage with conflict. We were taught to fear it, to silence ourselves, to equate friction with failure. And so we carry that fear into adulthood, into our marriages, our friendships, our families, and our careers. We become fluent in emotional avoidance, skilled at people-pleasing, and afraid of saying no because it might rock the boat. But the boat is already rocking. It always was. You were just pretending not to feel it. Conflict is not about being right, it's about being real. It's where boundaries are drawn, where truth is revealed, and where two people can finally stop dancing around what matters. It is where you get to say, "This hurt me," or "This doesn't work for me," without needing to blame and without needing to be perfect. It is also where the other person has the chance to hear you. Not the version of you that filters everything, but the one who is fully present, emotionally honest, and grounded in self-respect. Of course, conflict feels risky. It asks you to be vulnerable. It exposes you, not just to others, but to yourself. You confront your fears of rejection, your discomfort with emotional intensity, and your longing for control. But these aren't signs that something is wrong. They're signs that you are moving closer to the core. Because what's on the other side of conflict is not just resolution, it's recognition. It's the moment you realize that authenticity, not approval, is the foundation of any real connection. And not just with others, with yourself too. Because when you avoid conflict, you don't just silence your truth to keep someone else comfortable. You silence it because you're uncomfortable facing it. Conflict doesn't just clarify relationships, it clarifies identity. It forces you to define what matters to you, what your limits are, and what values you won't compromise. In that way, conflict becomes a mirror, not a battlefield. But you need courage to look into that mirror. You need clarity to stay in the room. You need emotional honesty to speak, not from reaction, but from self-awareness. So when the moment comes, and it always comes, when you feel the friction rising, when you're tempted to nod and smile just to keep the air light, ask yourself what you're choosing. Are you protecting the relationship or protecting your fear? Are you maintaining order or maintaining denial? Because silence may keep things neat, but the truth is what keeps them real. And you cannot build anything real on top of what you refuse to confront. Conflict is not the enemy of peace. It is the price of peace. Not the fragile kind built on avoidance, but the resilient kind built on truth. When you stop fearing confrontation, you begin to find your voice. You begin to see who belongs in your life, not just when you're agreeable, but when you're honest. You begin to live without the mask, without the role, without the weight of pretending. And what emerges is not chaos, it's clarity. It's you, unfiltered, and that is where true freedom begins. 7. Say no without guilt. It's a form of self-respect. Have you ever said sure while every part of you was screaming no? Maybe it was a favor you didn't have the energy for, a commitment you didn't have time to take on, or a conversation you weren't emotionally ready to have, but you agreed anyway. Not because you wanted to, not because someone forced you, but because the idea of saying no felt heavier than the weight of doing it. This is the silent burden so many carry, the guilt of protecting their own time, energy, and peace. You're not being polite. You're abandoning yourself and calling it kindness. We live in a culture that praises selflessness but often forgets to distinguish it from self-erasure. Saying no has been labeled rude, ungrateful, even selfish, especially if you're someone who's been conditioned to be accommodating. Over time, you start to internalize the idea that your needs must always come last, that boundaries are barriers to connection, and that declining a request somehow makes you a bad person. So you overextend, you show up tired, you smile through exhaustion. You become dependable, not because you're full, but because you've forgotten what rest even feels like. This isn't kindness. It's quite self-destruction. Every time you say yes out of guilt, you reinforce the belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. You train your nervous system to equate rejection with danger, and your inner voice grows quieter. You might not even notice how often you say yes on autopilot, but your body feels it, the tension in your shoulders, the anxiety before another obligation, the way your mind races even in stillness. These are not signs of strength. They're signs of boundary collapse. And that collapse doesn't just affect you. It shapes how others treat you. Because when you never say no, people stop asking if you want to. There's a quiet kind of resentment that builds in people who can't say no. It doesn't explode. It leaks through passive-aggressive comments, through emotional withdrawal, through burnout that feels like numbness. You find yourself irritated by small things, distant from people you once cared for, and unsure why everything feels so heavy. But deep down, you know, you've been carrying too much of what was never yours to begin with. You've said yes to please others, but in the process, you've betrayed yourself. Not once, but repeatedly. And now you're too exhausted to even articulate what you really need. Reclaiming your right to say no isn't about being harsh. It's about being honest. It starts by realizing that no is not a rejection of others. It's a declaration of self-respect. It's how you protect your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. It's how you make space for the things that matter. And more importantly, It's how you start to rebuild the broken trust you have with yourself. Every honest no is a small act of self-loyalty. It tells your inner self, I hear you. I won't abandon you this time. But learning to say no without guilt is a process. It requires unlearning the idea that your value depends on your compliance. It requires facing the discomfort of disappointing others and realizing that their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not responsible for managing everyone's emotional reactions. You are responsible for staying true to what you know is right for you. And sometimes what's right for you will not sit well with others. That's okay, because the cost of constant yes is not just time, it's identity. And your identity deserves protection. The truth is, the people who truly respect you will not be lost when you say no. If a relationship cannot survive your boundary, it was never built on mutual respect to begin with. Saying no filters out the dynamics where you are only valued for your compliance. It invites the kind of connection where you're valued for your clarity, your presence, and your truth. And more than anything, it teaches you to trust your own decisions. That trust is not built in grand gestures. It's built in small moments, where you pause, check in with yourself, and choose what feels honest, even if it's uncomfortable. You don't owe the world an explanation for your no. You don't need a long excuse, a soft buffer, or a smile to soften it. A simple no, thank you is enough. And in time, your guilt will be replaced with groundedness. You'll feel the shift from panic to peace, from tension to trust. Because when your yes is no longer automatic, it becomes sacred. And when your no is clear, your energy becomes clean. You're no longer stretched thin by invisible expectations. You're no longer living in fear of disappointing everyone. You're finally living in alignment with your values, your limits, and your worth. So the next time you feel that familiar pressure to agree, pause. Not to delay, but to decide, with intention, with awareness, and with care. Ask yourself, is this a yes that honors me? Or is it just another way to avoid the discomfort of saying no? Because saying no is not rejection. It's direction. And it's one of the most powerful ways you'll ever say yes to yourself. 8. You are not meant to be agreeable. You are meant to be whole. You were not born to be the most agreeable person in the room. You were not designed to be a mirror reflecting other people's expectations, nor were you placed here to earn affection by trimming down your truth. You were born to be whole, with your own voice, your own values, your own limits, and your own desires. But somewhere along the way, many people traded that wholeness for harmony. They learned to please, to perform, to bend in all the right ways, not because it felt right, but because it felt safer. And eventually they confused being liked with being loved, and being agreeable with being good. This is what happens when you mistake emotional safety for invisibility. You play roles, you wear masks, you fine-tune your responses based on what the room can handle, rather than what your soul needs to say. You say yes more than you want to. You say no less than you should. You mold yourself into something soft and inoffensive because you were taught that truth is dangerous and boundaries are unkind. But as you make yourself easier to digest, you become harder to recognize. And one day you look at your life, the relationships you've built, the routines you follow, the energy you carry, and you wonder, who was I before I started making everyone else comfortable? Agreeableness, when it's rooted in fear, is not a virtue, it's a mask. And the longer you wear it, the more it suffocates you. You start to forget what it feels like to speak freely. You start to doubt your own instincts. You hesitate before sharing your thoughts, not because they're unclear, but because you're measuring their impact before they even leave your mouth. You begin to equate silence with safety and compliance with character. But this isn't peace, it's emotional censorship. And over time, it doesn't just drain your energy, it erodes your identity. To be whole is to carry the full spectrum of who you are without apology. It means allowing your opinions to exist even when they contradict someone else's. It means expressing needs even when they're inconvenient. It means honoring your intuition even when it disrupts the status quo. And yes, that might make it harder to digest. It might make you less popular in certain rooms, but it will also make you real. And realness is the foundation of integrity, not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. There is a heavy kind of sadness that comes from living as a version of yourself, crafted to avoid rejection. You may never feel overtly depressed. You might still laugh, still perform well, still get praise. But underneath it all, there's a subtle ache, an emotional distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be. That's not success. That's disconnection. And that disconnection often shows up as fatigue, as inner conflict, as a quiet sense of resentment you can't name. It's not because life is unkind. It's because you've made a habit of ignoring the voice inside you in favor of being what others need. But that voice, it's still there. It's the part of you that flinches when you betray yourself. It's the part that feels empty after you're praised for something that doesn't feel true. It's the part that whispers, "This isn't who I am," when you're smiling for someone else's comfort. And that voice doesn't want you to be rude or selfish or combative. It simply wants you to be honest. Not loud, not reckless, just true. Being whole doesn't mean being perfect. It means being anchored. It means knowing who you are, what matters to you, what you will and won't tolerate. Not from a place of ego, but from a place of inner alignment. And when you live in alignment, your energy shifts. You no longer feel the need to be understood by everyone. You stop chasing approval because you already respect yourself. You stop over-explaining because your worth is not on trial. You stop fearing judgment because you know you were never meant to be someone else's version of acceptable. This kind of wholeness comes at a cost. You will disappoint people. You will be misunderstood. You will walk away from things that once felt safe but were never sincere. But what you gain is clarity, integrity, and emotional freedom. You begin to live in your own rhythm. You begin to speak in your own voice. You begin to trust yourself again. So the next time you feel the pull to shrink, to be polite instead of real, to agree instead of pause, to disappear just a little for the sake of peace, ask yourself if that version of you is the one you want to live with. Because in the end, you're not here to be palatable. You're here to be whole. And wholeness may not always win applause, but it will always earn your self-respect. And that is worth everything. Freedom isn't found in being easy to like. It's found in living with emotional honesty, clear boundaries, and the quiet strength to say what needs to be said, even when it's uncomfortable. The fear of conflict has kept too many people small, agreeable, emotionally numb, and far from their truth. But staying silent doesn't protect your peace. It sacrifices your voice. And every time you choose comfort over clarity, you feed a version of yourself that isn't real. It's time to stop people-pleasing at the cost of your identity. It's time to stop masking your emotions and start reclaiming your voice. Saying no is not a betrayal. It's a declaration of self-respect. Expressing your needs isn't selfish, it's survival. You weren't born to disappear behind politeness or bury your truth under guilt. You were born to be whole, present, and free. So ask yourself, are you living to be accepted or to be authentic? Are you avoiding discomfort or aligning with who you are? Let that guide you. If this message spoke to you, share your story in the comments. Have you struggled with emotional suppression or the fear of conflict? Let others know they're not alone. And if you haven't yet, remember to like this video and subscribe for more on emotional honesty and authentic self-liberation.